Women are the base of our party. This is a one voting block of people who unequivocally have voted for Democrats, will vote for Democrats, but we need to respect that. We need to do something about that. We need to include their voices and we need to include their opinions. We need to include their strategic thinking as to why the Democratic Party is important to them. What are they doing for us? What are we doing for them? Again, going back to this idea that this presentation is about persuading a group of people that unfortunately, in my experience in 2016, when I was the coordinated campaign director in Wisconsin, we didn't do. Not only did we not do it in Wisconsin, but we didn't do it in Florida. We didn't do it in Iowa. We didn't do it in Nevada. We didn't do it in Colorado. We didn't do it in any of the quote-unquote battleground states across the country because we had basically three strategic imperatives that were handed down to us, if you will, by the DNC, by Brooklyn. And the last thing I want to do is rehash what happened in 2016, especially given the fact that, wow, Oklahoma had some amazing wins last week. Amazing wins last week. And you guys are the example of what it's like to turn the page and have conversations about what's happening within a community, what's happening within someone's home, within their schools, what's not happening to their roads, what income inequality means to so many people. But in 2016, again, the juxtaposition of why I brought up Kansas is because Kyle and the folks at JVA Campaigns did work in Kansas in 2016. And I bet you not many people in this room know that in Kansas, that wasn't stuck with these three strategic imperatives that I'm going to talk about, actually picked up by running this type of messaging, 13 state legislative seats. Not one, not four, not 10, 14. We were able to maintain the level of Democrats in 2012 and 2014 in Kansas. They picked up 14 seats. This was huge just recently in Kansas when they were to beat back the governor's tax bill. So the three strategic imperatives in 2016 for battleground states were, number one, to try to maintain Barack Obama's 2012 electoral group, right? Those people who voted for Barack, the president, in 2012. The second one was to try to find and register as many young people, African Americans and Latinos as possible. And then the third piece was to try to peel off as many Romney voters from 2012. Those Romney voters were people who are college educated that live in sort of like suburban outer portions of a metropolitan city, and those are places just outside Milwaukee, Wisconsin, for example, there. So what we didn't do was have conversations with people in Green Bay. We didn't have conversations with people that were in Madison, Wisconsin, that were in central Wisconsin, in northwest Wisconsin. We weren't having conversations about manufacturing and trade. The unions were founded in the state of Wisconsin, and we didn't have a conversation with them about the economy. We weren't talking to them about job growth, and we weren't talking to them about job security. We were talking to them about equality, obviously, but we just weren't having these persuasive conversations. So one of the things that Kyle and his team did that I think is just fascinating is they did a count of the words that Donald Trump used when he rode his escalator down Trump Hotel a year or so ago. And in the word count, what we saw, and I think the word at the top there is obviously great. He used the word great 36 times, country 27, jobs 23, China 22. These numbers are on the screen and everybody can see them, but you can see, like, this is that the words and the psychology within that group of voters that Kyle just spent so much time talking about. And in fact, Kyle and I have spoken about this where he picked up the phone and called the national political director for the Steelworkers and wondered whether or not they had given Donald Trump their polling because it was all of the same information. Now, on the flip side, Secretary Clinton's word count was much different. When you look at what she talked about, she obviously was talking to a much wider base of people. She wasn't just having a conversation with a narrow select group like the Republican Party does. She used American 58 times, or Americans. She didn't really bring up Iraq. She didn't bring up the military or ISIS. She didn't bring up trade or Obamacare. She didn't use the words build or even talk about China that much. She didn't talk about the auto industry. She didn't bring up Mexico, but every time Donald Trump spoke, he'd talk about building a wall and who was going to pay for it. So that juxtaposition between, again, you can see from the outset who was going to be doing persuasion and who was going to be focusing on turnout. Again, what we're saying is that this is a both-and approach. We need to bring in as many people as possible in order to grow our organizations, grow the electorate by doing voter registration and reaching out to the people that are part of our base. We also have to come up with very smart messages and use really cool tools and new tools to communicate with those folks. Now, this next slide is very eye-popping, and we've had some conversations about it, but essentially everyone has read or seen or heard about how the models were wrong in 2016. The polling has been so far off. Where did they go wrong? For me, and I know a lot of people are looking at the area, the geography around Oklahoma, but for me, I looked at Wisconsin because that's where I was, and what we could see is that we were outperforming in the southeastern portion of the state where we put over 40 organizers on the ground. We spent a ton of time there. But where we underperformed was in the rural parts of the state, the more heavily white working class areas of the state. We didn't do any persuasion. We didn't talk about growing the economy. We did not do voter registration out there. There are colleges and universities in these communities where you could really drill in to having a conversation about jobs of the future. In any event, when you look at Oklahoma, the conversation that's really interesting is the western portion of the state, where there are real opportunities for growth. The same holds true, again, in western Kansas. For me, I can't necessarily speak to Oklahoma as much as I can to Kansas, but the map is very similar. This is where the large Hispanic population is growing, right? And getting into those communities, making an investment by the party at every level into those communities early, having a very long game approach there, not thinking that you're going to start winning within the first cycle or the second cycle, but knowing that these folks are moving there, they're working there, they're raising families there, they're staying there, so there's opportunities to win in that area. Again, this was my portion of this presentation. Not again to rehash what happened in 2016, but to really show the difference between what happens when we don't do persuasion, like we didn't do at the presidential level in 2016, versus when we do, which is what they did do in Kansas in 2016, and they won 14 state legislative seats. So again, the chair has, and the party has these slides and this research. I encourage everybody to look at it, to try to use it. I ask your candidates to use it. And when you're doing recruitment for candidates, to use it, letting them know that the focus just isn't going to be on one segment of voters, but there's real need to do both. So thank you all.
So the final part of this presentation is probably the most important, and it goes to the fact that Democrats and Republicans are wired very differently. We think very differently. And I call this section Political Psychology 101, not to be flippant or to be disrespectful, but it really focuses on two things that frustrate me about Democrats, and especially Democratic operatives like myself who work with candidates. One is that Democratic consultants have a bad habit of getting polls and following the polls verbatim, whereas Republican consultants do polling, get the polls, and figure out how to change what doesn't look good. And it's a real pet peeve of mine, the fact that Democrats just follow what's in front of them. Republicans have a mindset that really allows them to think about how to change and reconstruct things to favor them. And we have to be more mindful of that and not just look at what's in black and white and follow without question, but figure out if our numbers are low or bad somewhere, how do we fix it? And the other part that this goes to is the point that Republican consultants largely come from corporate America. And they come from a background where they're trying to change the minds of people to support their products, to buy their products. Whereas a lot of Democratic consultants, and it's no disrespect, but they come from academia where they're trying to reinforce issues and win the debate. And so those who often try to win the debate lose elections. And we have to start thinking and recognizing how Republicans think. So I want to walk through some of the conservative mindsets that we can understand how Republicans think and how we can more successfully